School of Rock is now in session in Iowa, and we're ready to help make musicians. In our patented performance-based program, students learn music in one-on-one lessons, then have band practice in a fun, safe learning environment, all leading up to their big show. Guitar, bass, piano, drums, and vocals, our local professionals teach the skills you need to be a rock star. Come check us out and get a free lesson with no strings attached. Locations in West Des Moines and Marion. Visit schoolofrock.com to learn more and start your musical journey today.
The morning news on YourIowa.com is brought to you by the Commission on U.S. Territories, striving for equal representation around the globe, and by Keep Iowa First, committed to keeping the Iowa caucuses the first in the nation contest in selecting the presidency of the United States. And now, here's your host, Brent Roske.
Good morning, everyone. We've almost made it. It is Thursday. You've almost made it to the end of the week. And so happy to have you with us here this morning. Up on the screen here, this is the work tag, the name tag for Captain Tristan Loraine. He's going to be with us in just a second. I love to travel. I love air travel. But what if I was to tell you that you're going to find out something today that may change your habits, not necessarily about air travel, but about something that could change the entire industry. So very grateful to Captain Tristan Loraine. He's going to be with us all the way from the UK this morning. Also this morning, going to have Brendan Kownacki live from Washington, D.C., giving us an update on the new stimulus package that was just passed and other exciting goings on there in DC. Tomorrow, we were going to have Golden Globe winner Sally Kirkland, but we're making a change. So this is Bruce Willis's new film, Cosmic Sin, and up on the top bar there, you'll see the name C.J. Perry. CJ is going to be on this program tomorrow. There's a clip of the trailer. Cosmic Sin is one of these big old sci-fi thrillers, and CJ. You might know her from the wrestling world. She plays Lana on World Wrestling, if you know about this sort of thing. But there she is. She's a sniper in this movie, and super happy to have her on. The movie actually opens tomorrow, so wanted to make sure we got her on the special opening day week. And there's Bruce Willis fighting some intergalactic baddies. Good for them. So. Very excited about that. So, folks, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to be back with Brendan Kownacki live from Washington, D.C. We'll be right back.
There's a new spin on casual dining near Drake University. Lucky Horse Beer and Burgers. Craveable faves, flatbreads, delicious burgers, frozen cocktails, and a crazy cool vibe. Get to Lucky Horse Beer and Burgers today.
Brendan from Washington, D.C., how are you this morning?
Good morning. How are you?
You know, Brendan, I got to tell you, every time I see you, your hair is even more and more fabulous. I got to give props to, it's a very creative and adventurous hairstyle.
All my expression comes out of my hair. I'm growing it out for a project right now. I'll have to come back and introduce just why my hair is going so wild these days.
I love it. I'm excited to hear that. So last time, viewers, you saw Mr. Kownacki on was right after the Capitol riot. He was kind enough to film some footage there, and we had D.C. Shadow Senator Paul Strauss on that day as well, talking about what Washington, D.C. was like at the time. But why don't, we have a new administration in now since that time. Well, why don't you kind of give us an overview of the changes in Washington, and then we'll nail down some specifics.
Brendan, it's been a very exciting time. Yesterday was the 50th day of the Biden administration. And famously, everybody likes to track the first 100 days of a new president. And so this is, we're halfway into that metric. And this has been an exciting time. We've seen a lot of reversals back to traditional. We've got, the Biden family doing everything from having first dogs. Of course, they got in trouble last week, but the first lady's been very active. On Valentine's Day, she put big hearts on the White House lawn to promote civility and love and caring. And then, of course, now we've seen things like the White House daily briefing coming. Every day, Press Secretary Jen Psaki is out there engaging with the press And this president, he tweets maybe once, twice a day. So it's definitely a very different day-to-day norm than we saw over the last 4 years.
Yeah, certainly a change in tone out of the West Wing there. And, last night we just had something get pushed through. People are calling it a win for the Biden administration, but not necessarily a win for bipartisanship. That's the House passing the coronavirus relief bill. Why don't you walk us through what's going on?
It's very funny because outside of the Capitol building, we still see some of the fences that we talked about around the inauguration. We still have the National Guard patrolling. But inside the chamber, they've passed a $1.9 trillion relief package for COVID. Well, that's what they're saying, is that it's the relief package for COVID. What actually needs to be looked at is that not all of that money is going to coronavirus relief. Now, $1.9 trillion is a momentous number. It's bigger than the economies of Canada, Russia, some of countries that we consider our huge allies, Mexico. And so when you look at this, only about 9% of these funds are going to direct COVID relief, according to Senator Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee, with the other 191% going to what many people are calling the biggest, most progressive agenda for Democrats. And so while no Republicans signed on to this bill, the Democrats really seized on the opportunity to take their moment in power and go with as many programs as they could. That's, including higher education, funding for native lands, so many different programs that, like you said, this is possibly a big win for America, not for bipartisanship.
Folks, we're going to come back with Brendan in just a couple minutes. We're gonna flip over to a special message from the United Nations, and then Captain Tristan Loraine is actually live with us from the UK. So we're going to come back with Brendan in just a couple minutes. Here's a message from the UN, and then we're going to go chat with Captain Tristan Loraine, his fascinating new documentary. Don't go anywhere. Folks, welcome back to the program live from the United Kingdom. There he is, Captain Tristan Loraine. Thanks so much for being on the program today, sir.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Sir, I've got to tell you, so I do the show Monday through Friday. I have many guests on, and a lot of times prep for that gets minimized. I saw the link for your film. I was like, okay, I'm going to check a few minutes of this. I watched 10 minutes. I watched 20 minutes. I watched the entire thing, start to finish. It is fascinating. It is urgent. Well done on an amazing film. It's called Everybody Flies. Why don't you give people, it's shocking. Why don't you give people a little heads up as to what it is, a brief rundown?
Yeah, sure. So any of your listeners who've been on an airplane, whether you've been in first class or economy, when you're sitting there at 35,000 feet, looking out the window, having a gin and tonic or eating your meal or just thinking about the business meeting you're about to go to, have you ever asked yourself, where does the air that you're breathing come from? Because outside it's twice as cold as your home freezer and there isn't enough air pressure to keep you alive. So how are you surviving in this airplane? And that's really interesting because very few people know the answer. And the answer is that the air you're breathing all originates from the engines in a process known as bleed air, because it's bled off the compression section of the engine. And this hot air comes in, it's cooled, and then you breathe it, totally unfiltered. And the problem is this air gets contaminated in varying degrees all the time, small amounts, and then to higher amounts when there's more problems with synthetic lubricating oils or hydraulic fluids. And people may think, oh, that's fine. I put oil in my car, big deal. But, these are oils and hydraulic fluids contain some really hazardous chemicals, including organophosphates. Sarin is an organophosphate, a far more toxic version. So in essence, what we have is a problem. We have a design flaw in aircraft. And people say, well, how is it possible that you have this design flaw? Because when they first introduced this in the 50s, they knew there was a problem, but people smoked on airplanes. So nobody could tell when the air gets contaminated. And people say, well, how do I know it's contaminated? It has a kind of a very subtle smell, a bit like a wet dog kind of smell. And it can be very subtle. I've sat on airplanes and I can notice it. And all the passengers around me are oblivious. People assume when you get on an airplane that everything's safe. And it is safe. From a statistical point of view, flying from A to B is the safest form of transport whatsoever. However, this problem has rendered pilots impaired or totally incapacitated. It's ended careers. And the people who make these oils state on the can, do not breathe mist or vapor from heated product, suspected of causing cancer, risk to the unborn, etc. So passengers need to know, because if passengers knew what was going on, they'd simply say, hey, you charge me for, where I sit, how much bags I take on, etc. I'll pay another quarter, but please filter the air.
Here's and I want to show folks this photograph. You know what you're talking about when it comes to air travel. There's you. Why don't you tell folks about this picture?
Yeah, so I was a captain with British Airways, and I was also a union health and safety representative. And one day this guy calls me up and he says, these strange smells we get in the cockpit. And I said, yeah, it's fine. And he said, well, how do you know it's fine? And so I asked an engineer and he said, oh, it's just oil, nothing to worry about. And I just thought, yeah, that's fine. I just, just like you think cooking oil, olive oil or something like that. And he said, have you actually ever picked up a can of the oil and seen what's in it? And I went, no. He said, well, pick up a can and then you'll see what's actually going on. And that was 2001, 20 years ago. I've been doing this pretty much every day of my life. And I'll keep doing it until we get the problem fixed.
So basically, if you're on an airplane, what your documentary states basically is that if you're on an airplane and you've seen the videos now, people say, oh, there was a smoke that came in or there was a strange smell and all that. What you're saying is it's not someone who spilled some food. It's not someone who took their shoes off. What you're saying is it's chemicals, that there's an oil leak in an engine, that the air is flowing through the engine, and that oil leak, it's getting burned off, and that smoke is coming into the cabin. That's the basic gist?
Well, I mean, of course, there's sometimes, they burn food in the ovens, and yes, there can be other explanations. But what we're saying is this is absolutely occurring on every flight in varying degrees. Now, on every flight, it could be totally harmless levels to all the passengers. However, there's no exposure limits for the stuff. No testing's been done. There's no detection systems on airplane to warn when the air is contaminated. Do we want a pregnant passenger sitting there inhaling this stuff? Oh, absolutely not. I think people need to start asking questions. And you had your guest speaker on before talking about Joe Biden, and and in Europe we follow the American politics. But here's the crazy thing: it doesn't matter whether Democrats or Republicans are in power. Nobody ever fixes this problem. Because as you saw in the film, flight attendants went to the U.S. Senate and complained to this Congress in the early 1990s and said, "Please, government, help us fix this problem." But, nobody does anything. It's just big corporate industries have got a huge amount of pressure on whatever government you're in. Let's hope Joe Biden's team does it. That'd be great.
What's interesting in the film, look, you got so many people to speak on camera, former pilots, former members of the crew. But what's amazing is toward the end of the film, you show the one pipe that comes from the engine in, and you show that, well, here's all the corrosion and on the inside of the pipe. But the fix isn't necessarily a game changer, right? Like, it wouldn't be the most impossible thing in the world to fix this problem, would it?
Well, it's a really good question, because on Monday, in a couple of days' time, the biggest conference ever in the world on these issues starts at aircraftcabonair.com. And it's a 4-day conference. And at that conference, a number of U.S. companies, because the Americans are leading the way with this, are going to present, the technologies that they're developing to filter the air. And people say, well, why haven't they already done it? Well, that's because the public don't know about this issue. So nobody complains, nobody asks questions. But when we make the films so that the public become informed, because we need aviation, we absolutely do. But I can't have my colleagues flying around becoming impaired or incapacitated, and I can't have passengers being exposed. And a simple fix to an airplane is probably about $50,000. It's nickel and dime money. And, how can you have an airplane with no contaminated air warning system? I can sit there in the cockpit and tell you the temperature of the air outside, the temperature of the air in the cabin. I can even tell you the temperature of the fuel, but I can't tell you anything about the quality of the air people are breathing. I mean, this is an aerospace industry that has overcome countless challenges in its time. When Kennedy said, let's go to the moon, 7 years later, they were walking on the moon. And here we are with a problem that's been going on over 50 years, and they still haven't just had the will to fix it.
You have dedicated a good portion of your life to this. In the documentary, you showed one of the captains, you interviewed him, and then 4 years later, you're back to interview him. And that was something that really struck me. You saw the literal physical decline of some of these folks. Why don't you talk about, now that we've addressed the problem, what has it done to folks that you know and folks that you highlight in the documentary? What exposure to this?
Well, to give you an idea, I did the Ironman triathlon. So, I was, in my 40s, I was a pretty fit guy. And after a really big exposure, I could hardly run a mile. And then eventually I was ill health retired. But, I was one of the lucky ones. One of my best buddies in British Airways, the first email he ever sent me when he found out I was investigating these things, he said, I know this stuff has an effect. Every time I breathe it in, I can feel it having an effect on me. The guy died of a brain tumor in his 40s. It's just not right.
Yeah, and the stories, folks, in this documentary from airline attendants, etc. I mean, everyone who's been exposed to this. There's so many. That's the thing that I was shocking. Not only passengers but crew, and there are just so many documented cases you talk about. This is not an isolated incident. And you said, this problem. So in the 50s, you used to get the air through compressors, and then they all decided we're going to bring the air in through the engines. And that seems to be the way. You said there's only one plane that doesn't have that. Is that right?
Yeah, and the Americans make it, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. And it's worth saying to your American viewers, as a European, I've got to put my hand up and say, we started this problem, because when the Americans first started designing passenger jets, and your older viewers remember like the DC-8 or 707, they didn't take the air from the engines because they knew it could get contaminated. But the Europeans decided, no, we can save money. We can make the airplane lighter. We'll just pump the air into the cabin. We're sure to be okay, which put them at a competitive advantage over the American aircraft manufacturers. So they had to follow suit. So, it was the Europeans that started this. And sadly, it won't be the Europeans who fix it in a hurry, I don't think. And, and sometimes I meet people and they say, it's just not possible. How is this possible? And I say, well, the High Court of Australia ruled after an 18-year legal battle, inhaling heated engine oils is harmful. The Australian Senate had a year-long inquiry, the longest inquiry ever into this issue, and they concluded it was a problem. So, hey, if it's good enough for them, it should be good enough for anybody who gets on an airplane to know we need to do something.
So I realized the pandemic changed the distribution plans for your documentary. It's called Everybody Flies, but how can folks see it?
Well, our sales agent is in discussions with Netflix and people like that. And, as any filmmaker would tell you, you just have to hope somebody actually watches the film. But, your viewers will also be interested to know when we were making Everybody Flies, we were investigating the whole issue, and we're doing it for 5 years. And we started to look at one of America's biggest air crashes, which was an American Airlines flight 965 that flew from Miami to Cali in Colombia, and it crashed on approach. And when we started to investigate that, it was the same airplane I flew, and I was being impaired. So we actually made a whole new documentary called American 965, which we just finished on the 1st of January. And we are convinced that the plane crash was probably due to the crew becoming impaired by contaminated air.
My goodness. Well, it's a fascinating documentary. I wish you the best of luck in the distribution process. And you said the conference is happening Monday. Is that something that folks can view, or is that something we're going to have to see news reports?
No, it's going to be the biggest conference ever in the world. It's at aircraftcabonair.com. It's totally free. Whether you're a scientist or a passenger or anybody, go to the website, look at the schedule, sign up and just as we keep saying, fly informed.
Captain Tristan Loraine, thank you so much. And after the conference in a few weeks, I'd love to have you come back on and see what sort of progress has been made. It's interesting that this feels like a possible tipping point of information. And again, the solution is not a game changer. The solution is a small investment. And so I congratulate you on your documentary. I applaud you for all your hard work. And thank you so much for being on the program today.
No, thank you very much for having me, and stay safe. Bye.
Folks, we're going to take a quick break. Here's a PSA for Justice for Vets, and then we'll be back with Brendan Kownacki from Washington, D.C.
A decade of war has taken an unprecedented toll on our men and women in uniform.
Most veterans return to our communities as leaders, but everyone's journey home is not the same.
Hundreds of thousands of our veterans are suffering from the trauma of war.
Without assistance, the downward spiral can be quick and destructive.
It doesn't have to be this way.
At Justice for Vets, we believe that every veteran should have the opportunity for treatment and restoration.
Justice for Vets is the only national organization dedicated to the expansion of veterans' treatment courts.
Veterans treatment courts hold our veterans accountable for their actions.
By providing structure, treatment, and mentoring, these courts help our veterans and their families get their lives back on track.
And veterans treatment courts work.
We ask much of our men and women in uniform, and they ask little in return. It is our collective duty to come to their aid when they struggle on the home front. This not only honors their sacrifice, but makes our communities stronger.
A donation to Justice for Vets helps put a veterans treatment court within reach of every veteran in need.
A donation to Justice for Vets keeps veterans in treatment where they belong.
A donation to Justice for Vets shows your commitment to leaving no veteran behind.
A donation to Justice for Vets will help save lives, restore families, and rebuild communities.
Get involved and go to justiceforvets.org.
Veterans fought for our freedom. Now it's our turn to fight for theirs. Thank you.
Folks, welcome back to the program. You know, Brendan, I think that was the last time I saw you. Was at the premiere of that PSA at Warner Brothers. Is that right?
Absolutely. That, you know, you and I are both big fans of Justice for Vets and the folks who are in that PSA. And, you know, it's always good to see that message resonating out to the public and getting some support.
Yeah, last night, he's not in that piece, but a different West Wing cast member, Matt Del Negro. It was great to catch up with him. Haven't seen him for a while. And it's interesting how time flies, man. That was 5 years ago that we premiered that PSA, and grateful that it's still getting, you know, lots of play. And certainly Justice for Vets is doing some great work. So well done to them. Brendan, I'm sorry I had to cut you short earlier, but had to click over to the UK for Captain Loraine. I just I'll send you over a link to the documentary. It's fascinating, and it's something that, you know, when
it's going to make me rethink flying to Iowa to see you. So
that's it. Well, and that's the thing. This is not, again, it's not a game changer. You don't, to fix this, it doesn't mean we have to cut the wings off airplanes. It's nothing to do with that. It's a few things that you could retrofit onto this, and you wouldn't have to worry about it. But anyway, again, huge thanks to Captain Tristan Loraine, Petra at his agency for bringing him on the program. It just it goes to show you, you know, it is the reason the show exists, to exchange information, get the word out, and help in however we can. So Brendan, I had to cut you short a little bit ago, and I want to jump back into it. So the coronavirus relief plan, what's interesting, let me bring it back to Iowa viewers here. So part of the coronavirus relief package gives money to the state. So Iowa state's government share. So they send money to each state government. The state of Iowa is going to get $1.3 billion. And the way that breaks down, Ankeny is going to get $9 million. Des Moines, $94 million. West Des Moines, where we're living right now, $8.15 million. And what's interesting, so Mayor Frank County is a friend of mine, Des Moines Mayor, been to the House. He's told Axios this morning, city officials don't know how the money is exactly going to be spent, but they certainly have a lot of ideas. You know, he said, well, maybe we'll use discretion to fix up streets, bridges, But part of the coronavirus relief package is literally saying, here's some federal bucks. Let's invest it into our cities. And you know, that we talked about differences in the administrations and differences in approaches. It seems like the Biden administration is saying, you know what, we're not going to give money necessarily to big business. We're going to give it to cities. We're going to give it to individuals and put some money back in their pockets. What do you think, Brendan? What is the change in tone?
Well, Congress has dubbed this the American Rescue Plan, and that it's really about trying to bring America back from both the pandemic, but also from 4 years of getting off track in the minds of many Democrats throughout the Congress. And so they've taken this amount of money that's the size of the economy of Australia, and they've dispersed it around. And so we've heard a lot of people talking about the stimulus checks. This is the direct infusion of cash to the people who need it into their houses. That's about $1,400 a person. Now, of course, if you took the 1.9 trillion, that would be a much larger sum. But of course, this is where the rest of that money's going, to the states. And so I think one of the questions that people have is Republicans think that it's unfocused because they don't know how this money is actually going to be spent. You have these large pots of money, $1 billion being sent to Iowa. What's going to happen to it? Now, the Democrats are feeling this trust. They're feeling this infusion of our infrastructure. And so they think that basically it's this idea, like you said, rather than big business, that you're going to have other elected officials who've been given the trust by their people to find ways to take this money and put it back where it belongs, in the hands of the individuals, in the hands of communities, and trying to find a way to bring our struggling economy back to life a little bit.
Are you surprised that they still have all the barricades, et cetera, up around the Capitol and the White House? Are you surprised the security is still so strong?
There have been talks about a lot of anonymous threats from different militia organizations, and you can't always release exactly what information they might have on the inside. And so I'm a little bit surprised, because you'd like to think that the nation's capital is a safe place, that while these kinds of negotiations on budget and things like that we can get back to normal. But at this point, maybe there's just a level of instability that we haven't calmed yet. Of course, it's been 20 years. We're still taking our shoes off at the airport. So, it's not to say that sometimes when security measures get put in place, that there's a long runway before you're able to take off the gas a little bit.
A long runway. Excellent recall to our aviation theme this morning. So how long have you been in DC, Brendan?
This is, this summer it'll be 17 years. So
17. Boy, that's so interesting. 17. I did 17 years in Los Angeles. That's an interesting number. So you've been there, you've seen the ebbs and flows, you've seen different administrations, the Obama administration, Trump, and now Biden. My friend Paul Strauss is the DC shadow senator, and he and I have talked in great length about how the lifestyle, the mood changes in DC so much by the inhabitants of the White House. What are your thoughts on that? 17 years, have you seen a change?
It's there's definitely a sigh of relief going on, even despite the pandemic, even despite the fences in the National Guard. But since the beginning of the Biden administration, a lot of people feel like they've gained their evenings back, because they're not always waiting for the next tweet to drop and something to upset the news cycle. President Joe Biden has a fairly normal daily schedule. He gets up in the morning, he does his work, and he goes to bed. He goes to church on Sundays. He likes to pop out for some food. His wife has done some errands where she's gone and bought cookies. That this is definitely hearkening back to a very civil time in Washington, D.C. The president stopped by the city's oldest hardware store the other day to talk about how small businesses are doing. And so a lot of people are feeling a much more connected sense to their national leadership. And it comes right from the White House. And so I think, in the years that I've been here, we've definitely seen it. Famously, Barack Obama liked to go out to eat when he was in town here. Him and his wife would go to different restaurants. And while with the pandemic, that's not quite the thing. The Bidens certainly like to step out onto the town. Like I said, they've been going to a church every weekend in Georgetown. So there's definitely a lot more integration between them and the city they live in, whereas the Trumps were very much, in the house.
Interesting. That's fascinating. And yeah, you talk about schedules of journalists, and that's something that people don't necessarily think about, is that if the president wakes up at 11 p.m. or 2 in the morning and writes about something, it is the literal job of many journalists to cover that, no matter what it is, how big, small, or indifferent or impactful. And yeah, isn't that interesting? I mean, obviously, you and I both know many folks in the Washington, D.C. press corps, and how that has changed life. That's fascinating. How has it impacted your life, Brendan?
It's like you said, the overnight desk, and people always thought about it for a long time as that's the graveyard shift. No one wanted to be there. But for the last 4 years, it certainly was a shift that could generate some work and make some big waves going into the morning news. For me, it's been a big change the last 4 years to look at how people work on advocacy, how people work on talking about issues. I produce all kinds of content in my work when it comes to promoting different sides of education and looking at technology, how different industries approach members of Congress and other influencers here in the policy arena. And so for many years, this was a little bit of an insider's club. The Biden administration, again, has taken it back to a little bit more of a traditional approach. There is not necessarily just a big opening for lobbyists, but also they're interested to hear from different sides and try to see who are the most interesting or educated people when it comes to a given issue, and they want to be able to do that to inform their take on how they should proceed when it comes to any given topic.
You mentioned the word traditional. What I have been hoping for out of Washington, D.C. is just a little boredom, just a little, oh my God, I don't have to follow it 28 hours a day. That, maybe, perhaps, just maybe there are folks in D.C. doing their jobs, and that's okay, and we can focus on other things. So, Brendan Kownacki, live from Washington, D.C., thanks as always for being on the show. Hope to have you on again with some updates throughout, because your insights are fascinating. So thanks so much for being on the show, buddy.
We'll see you again.
All right. And folks, tomorrow, you're not going to want to miss this. CJ Perry, I love it. They popped her name up on the headliner there for the film tomorrow. Very excited to have her on the show tomorrow. She is, I love this trailer. She's co-starring in the new Bruce Willis film. It's called Cosmic Sin. Frank Grillo is in it as well, and she plays a sniper. She's one of, and there she is right there. And so she's from the wrestling world. She plays Lana in the wrestling world. She's on the Total Divas show, but it's going to be a fantastic conversation. She's just a hoot, fantastic fun. And we're excited because this movie is opening tomorrow. So very grateful to her and her team for having her on tomorrow on the big opening day. So thanks to her for being on tomorrow. And again, boy, this documentary, Everybody Flies, when we get the information on the distribution package for this film, we will definitely let you know. It is a fascinating documentary. You're going to want to see it. And next week, folks, we're going to have on Golden Globe winner Sally Kirkland. There she is. Sally's an old friend. She was nominated for an Oscar, won a Golden Globe. And there's her and I from an Oscar party just a few years ago. I put the palm trees in. I put the palm trees in behind on that one, just because I do miss California sometimes. I have to admit that. But thanks to everyone for tuning in. We will see you right back here tomorrow morning for my fascinating interview with CJ Perry of the new Bruce Willis action adventure sci-fi hit Cosmic Sin. We'll see you then.